What is up, everybody? Corey Hughes, Bloody History. We're back. Continuing on through the family jewels. Probably be on this for a couple weeks. We're going to knock out this entire 700-page document. Because while a lot of people mention family jewels, and a lot of people have discussed it in a superfluous manner, I promise nobody's dug deep into this thing. So, what my gut's telling me already, just as having gone through the first part of this, is that there are a confluence of factors going on here. Excuse me. And the government's trying to get to the bottom of this stuff, all right? So we have, let me try to name some of these threads that are going to be tangled here. Number one, you got a ZR rifle. Number two, you have the Kennedy assassination. Number three, you have and I'll separate this from ZR rifle. You have QJ Win, which QJ Win is two offices, right? Connected to ZR rifle, but beyond that, way beyond that. So QJ Win being two men, Otto Skorzeny and Jean-Pierre Lafitte, right? So that's tied into this. The attempts against Castro, which I'll separate from ZR rifle, because I think the attempts against Castro are bullshit. The attempts against Castro, I think, are cover story. No one will ever in a million years convince me that we couldn't knock off Castro. We took out Iraq in half a day. Okay? Give me a fucking break. We needed the perpetual boogeyman off the coast to maintain the Cold War. It was just, Castro, being a communist and being 90 miles off the coast, was a strategic scaffolding of the Cold War. Period. There's no other way to look at it. No other way to look at it. They could have gone in there with like two fucking fighter jets and just blew up his mansion, and that would have been the end of that. But did they do that? No. They didn't. None of the attempts to overthrow Cuba were real attempts, in my opinion. None. So you have all these different factors. The mafia, the Israelis. All these different threads are kind of converging around this family jewels file. And I promise you, the CIA will be obfuscating all the way. I promise you, at the end of the day, ZR rifle had nothing to do with Castro. I honestly doubt ZR rifle really even had anything to do with Chile or Trujillo. To me, ZR rifle encompassed, logically, there's no way to prove this, but just logically and understanding the circumstances, ZR rifle encompassed de Gaulle, it encompassed Lumumba, it encompassed Kennedy, John F. Kennedy. By sheer momentum, it appears to have encompassed Kennedy. By the players and the timing and all that stuff, it seems almost the ultimate expansion of ZR rifle. And I say that because you have from what I'm convinced is the connection between Lafitte and Valenti, which I make down in No Name Key, right? Which is in the ZR rifle files, where Max goes in through Traficante, meets up with Sturgis and I know it to be QJ Win, but the documents refer to Rosanoff and Rosani. Those are cryptonyms I haven't figured out yet. But one of them used the name Pierre, and both Jean-Pierre Lafitte and Jack Valente used aliases of Pierre. So today, we're going to continue on with this file. And the next thing to be pulled into this sphere of family jewels, which I believe is pure obfuscation. Can't prove it yet, don't know it to be fact, but I'm telling you, it's going to be a lot of finger pointing away from the true core of ZR Rifle. And that brings us to Project Mockingbird. Project Mockingbird, a telephone intercept activity, was conducted between the 12th of March 63 and 15th of June 63 and targeted two Washington newsmen who, at the time, had been publishing news articles based on and frequently quoting classified materials of this agency and others, including top secret and special intelligence. Okay, so I think this is some sort of cover for Operation Mockingbird, and I do believe they're two different things. I'm not an expert on this, but I do believe that I've seen numerous references to Mockingbird going back to 1956. So here they're saying that Project Mockingbird, which is the what I believe the cover story for the real Mockingbird, imagine they've been operating under an eyes-only or not on paper project called Operation Mockingbird, and then the name starts to get out, so then they come up with Project Mockingbird, which covers this specifically, so they can always have something to refer to as a cover. I think that's kind of what is going on here. Telephone intercept connections were installed at the newsmen's office and at each of their homes for a total of 3. The connections were established with the assistance of a telephone company official who responded to a personal request by the Director of Security, Colonel Sheffield Edwards. Colonel Edwards' authority for the activity was Mr. John A. McCone, Director of Central Intelligence. The latter conducted the activity in coordination with the Attorney General, Mr. Robert Kennedy, the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, and the Director of Defense Intelligence Agency, General Joseph Carroll. In addition to Office of Security personnel directly involved in the intercepts and research of materials acquired therefrom, only 3 other agency officials are on record as witting of the activity: the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence, General Marshall S. Carter, the Inspector, General Lyman Kirkpatrick, and the General Counsel, Mr. Lawrence Houston. The intercept activity was particularly productive in identifying contacts of the newsmen, their method of operation, and many of their sources for information. For example, it was determined that during the period they received data from 13 newsmen, 12 of whom were identified, 12 senators and 6 members of Congress, all identified, 21 congressional staff members, of whom 11 were identified, 16 government employees, including a staff member of the White House, members of the Vice President's office, and Assistant Attorney General, and other well-placed individuals. A number of other sources were partially or tentatively identified, but the short span of the activity precluded positive identification. It was observed that through these contacts, the newsmen actually received more classified and official data than they could use and passed some of the stories to other newsmen for release, establishing that many leaks appearing under other bylines were actually from the sources of the target newsmen. Since the termination of Project Mockingbird, those materials related to it, which were retained, indicating that some were not retained, have been maintained under strict security access of 2 Office of Security professionals. Looks like I have a blank page. Totally, the next page was completely redacted. All right. Next one. Subject, Yuri Ivanovich Nasenko. Yuri Ivanovich Nasenko, an officer of the KGB, defected to a representative of this agency in Geneva, Switzerland on 4th of February 1964. The responsibility for his exploitation was assigned to the then SR Division of the Clandestine Service, and he was brought to this country on 12th of February 1964. After initial interrogation by representatives of the SR Division, he was moved to a safe house in Clinton, Maryland from 4th of April 64, where he was confined and interrogated until the 13th of August 65, when he was moved to a specially constructed jail in a remote wooded area at Redacted. The SR Division was convinced that he was a dispatched agent, but even after a long period of hostile interrogation was unable to prove their contention, and he was confined at Redacted in an effort to convince him to confess. This office, with the Office of General Counsel, became increasingly concerned with the illegality of the agency's position in handling a defector under these conditions for such a long period of time. Strong representations were made to the director Mr. Helms by this office, the Office of General Counsel and the Legislative Liaison Council. And on 27th October 1967, the responsibility for Nosenko's further handling was transferred to the Office of Security under the direction of the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence, then Admiral Rufus Taylor. All right, so we're talking about Yuri Nosenko. Now, let's put something in context here. Nosenko is on the outskirts of Kennedy research. His name pops up, not involved, has nothing to do with it. They mention him in regards to Oswald. Just ignore everything that has to do with that because he doesn't fucking know nothing, okay? It has taken me the entirety of the time that I've been a researcher and have heard that name to understand, to right now, to understand why was so important to the CIA. And why his name kept popping up. Because his name pops up all the time. Even in some of these newer document releases by the National Archives. You know, the government releasing all this Kennedy stuff still. You'll see case files on Nosenko pop up. A lot. And I never understood why he was so important. I know he was a high-level defector. Big deal. You never see any of the intelligence he gave us. No matter how many times they talk about him. In whatever context. The context is never the information that he gave us. That's still under lock and key. But it wasn't until this very moment that I came to understand, after having read his name, hundreds of times over the years, not really paying much attention, but picking up little bits of the story here and there. Right now is the first time it ever made sense as to why this was such a big deal. And it had nothing to do with the information that he gave them, had nothing to do with his connection to Oswald, had nothing to do with even the fact that he was a high-ranking officer of the KGB. What it had to do with is the CIA was scared to fucking death that they illegally detained this man for a year and a half. From April 64 until August of 65, this guy was fucking kept in a safe house in Clinton, Maryland, and not allowed to leave. Then he was moved to a specially constructed jail in a remote wooded area. Okay, the SR division was convinced that he was a dispatched agent, but even after a long period of hostile interrogation was unable to prove their contention, and he was confined at redacted in an effort to convince him to confess. Okay, so that's why he was such a big deal, because they thought that action alone, I'm pretty sure they were convinced could get them shut down, because they had no right to do that at all. Constitutionally, it was illegal. They didn't make him go through any of the standard defection channels because he was such a high-ranking defector. And eventually they do let him go. Under heavily monitored circumstances, of course. But that was why he was such a big deal. And that's why his name keeps popping up. Because they were scared they were gonna get fucked because they held him for years and years. And he didn't do anything wrong except defect. Right? So that's why he was a big deal. Let me continue. This office, together with the Office of General Counsel, became increasingly concerned with the illegality of the agency's position in handling a defector under these conditions for such a long period of time. My strong representations were made to the director, Mr. Helms, by this office, the Office of General Counsel, and the Legislative Liaison Council. And on the 27th of October, 1967, the responsibility for Nosenko's further handling was transferred to the Office of Security under the direction of the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence, then Admiral Rufus Taylor. Nosenko was moved to a comfortable safe house in the Washington area and was interviewed under friendly, sympathetic conditions by his security case officer, Mr. Bruce Solie, S-O-L-I-E, for more than a year. It soon became apparent that Nosenko was bona fide, and he was moved to more comfortable surroundings with considerable freedom of independent movement, and has continued to cooperate fully with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and this office since that time. He has proven to be the most valuable and economical defector this agency has ever had, and leads which were ignored by the SR division were explored and have resulted in the arrest and prosecution, and in 2 lines redacted. He's currently living under an alias, secured a divorce from his Russian wife, and remarried an American citizen. He's happy, relaxed, and appreciative of the treatment accorded him, and states, "While I regret my 3 years of incarceration, I have no bitterness and now understand how it could happen." All right, moving on. Some of these lack headings, so they're just kind of thrown together, numerous and various documents. So this one just starts off with a heading of surveillances. Section A, the title is redacted. During the periods of 1 to 20 February, 12th, April 7th, and May and 9th through 20th of August 1971, a surveillance was conducted of Redacted, a former staff employee, and Redacted, a Cuban national with whom Redacted became professionally and emotionally involved. Surveillance was predicated upon information that Redacted had been seeking from employees information on information processing division files, and that employees were visiting a photographic studio operated by Redacted in Fairfax City, Virginia. In addition to physical surveillance, one surreptitious entry of the photographic studio was made, and an attempt to enter the apartment of Redacted was aborted because of a door lock problem. B, heading Redacted. Pursuant to a request from the CI staff, approved by the DCI, surveillances were conducted of Redacted and her associates at various times from May to September 1971. Then you have a long sentence, Redacted. Had long been a source of the WH division and had given information regarding a plot to assassinate or kidnap Vice President Agnew of the DCI, and the DCI. Surveillances include coverage of the activities of Miss King during 2 visits to the United States, technical coverage of debriefings of her by the WH division representative, Western Hemisphere division representatives in New York City, and surveillance, including mail coverage of several American citizens alleged to be part of the plot. Although most of the surveillance occurred in New York City, surveillance of one of the individuals included extensive coverage of a commune in Detroit. C. Celotex 1. CELOTEX. At the direction of the DCI, a surveillance was conducted of Michael Gettler of the Washington Post during the periods 6 through 9 October, 27th of October to 10th of December 1971, and on the 3rd of January 1972. In addition to physical surveillance, an observation post was maintained in the Statler Hilton Hotel, where observation could be maintained of the building housing in his office. The surveillance was designed to determine Gettler's sources of classified information of interest to the agency, which had appeared in a number of his columns. D. Celotex 2. At the direction of the DCI, surveillance was conducted of Jack Anderson and at various times his legmen, Britt Hume, Leslie Whitten, and Joseph Spear, from 15 February to 12 April 1972. In addition to the physical surveillance and observation post, an observation post was maintained in the Statler Hilton Hotel, directly opposite Anderson's office. The purpose of the surveillance was to attempt to determine Anderson's sources for highly classified agency information appearing in his syndicated columns. E. Butane. At the direction of the DCI, a surveillance was conducted on Victor L. Marchetti from 23 March to 20 April 1972. The purpose of this surveillance was to determine his activities and contacts, both with agency employees and other individuals, in regards to his proposed book and published magazine articles exposing agency operations. 2. Police support. A. During 1969, 70, and 71, on several occasions, the Intelligence Division of the Metropolitan Police Department was provided a communication system to monitor major anti-Vietnam War demonstrations in the Washington area. This system consisted of a radio receiver and an agent at the Intelligence Division headquarters and several automobiles from the Washington field office equipped with radio receivers and transmitters manned by 2 Washington field office agents, as well as representatives of the Intelligence Division Metropolitan Police Department. The benefits of the agency was that the communications over this system were monitored at the headquarters building to provide instant notice of possible actions by the dissidents against agency installations. During the period from 1968 to 1973, Several items of positive audio equipment consisting primarily of clandestine transmitters and touch-tone dial recorders were loaned to the Metropolitan Police Department, Fairfax County, Virginia Police Department, Montgomery County, Maryland Police Department, New York City Police Department, and the San Francisco Police Department. 3. General support. A. SR Pointer. Since 1953, this office has operated a mail intercept program of incoming and outgoing Russian mail and, at various times, other selective mail at Kennedy Airport in New York City. This operation included not only the photographing of envelopes, but also surreptitious opening and photographing of selected items of mail. The bulk of the take involved matters of international security interest, which was disseminated to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This program is now in a dormant state pending a decision as to whether the operation will be continued or abolished. B. A.E. Ladle, Ladle. For several years, the Office of Security has provided support to Anatoly Golitsyn, a Russian defector of interest to the CI staff. The rest of the paragraph is redacted. C. Red Face 1. In July 1970, this office made a surreptitious entry of an office in Silver Spring, Maryland, occupied by a former defector working under contract for the agency. This involved bypassing a contact and a sonic alarm system, entering a vault, and entering a safe within a vault. The purpose of the operation was to determine whether the individual had any unauthorized, classified information in his possession. D. Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. In January 1971, the director approved a request from Director, Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs to provide covert recruitment and security clearance support to the BNDD. This has been accomplished through the medium of a proprietary of the Office of Security known as Redacted and operating as long sentence Redacted. Support includes covert recruitment, investigation, polygraph, medical clearance, and training. It has been divided into 3 phases. 1, a CI operation to place individuals in BNDD field offices to monitor any illegal activities of other BNDD employees. 2 is Redacted, long sentence. And 3, recruitment of an individual used as an agent by BNDD, but actually employed by BNDD, although this fact is known only to the Director and Chief Inspector, BNDD. In this case, arrangements were made for all pay and other employee benefits to come from CIA on a reimbursable basis. E. The heading and paragraph are fully redacted. F. Merrimack, Merrimac. Each heading here is the name of an operation, by the way. So it would be Merrimack and Red Face, A.E. Ladle, SR Pointer. From February 67 to November 71, Redacted, an Office of Security Proprietary, recruited and handled several agents for the purpose of covertly monitoring dissident groups in the Washington area considered to be potential threats to agency personnel and installations. One of these agents so successfully penetrated one dissident group that she was turned over to the FBI for handling. In addition, during this period, the Office of Security field offices were tasked with collecting available intelligence on dissident groups. All such information was included in a periodic report distributed to appropriate parts of the agency and to certain outside government agencies. Next page is either empty or redacted. All right, it looks like we have some weird invoice type things. Material requisition from logistics by security for issuance to local police. 200 M9 gas masks, 196 M17 gas masks, 231 steel helmets, 96 vest and groin protectors, a whole bunch of more equipment like this. A bunch of chemical batons. I don't know what those are. Those sounds dope. Some Mustang 35 pistols. It says various quantities and types of replacement chemical cartridges, loading kits, and batteries were also ordered for asterisk items. I don't know what that had anything to do with. Next page was redacted. Subject, audio countermeasure support to the United States Secret Service. On the 25th of July, 1968, and at the specific request of the United States Secret Service, this office provided 2 audio countermeasure technicians to the USSS in connection with the Democratic National Convention held in Chicago, Illinois. This was not an official detail, although both men were provided with temporary credentials identifying them as being affiliated with the United States Secret Service. On the 5th, so what do we have here? We have a precedent, after the fact nonetheless, but we have a precedent here of the Secret Service issuing Secret Service ID cards to people who were not Secret Service, right? People who were CIA. Could this have been what happened when we had Secret Service men in Dealey Plaza who were not Secret Service? It's possible. On the 15th of August, 1968, we detailed the same 2 men to the United States Secret Service to cover the Republican National Convention in Miami, Florida. On both occasions, the team members were debriefed upon their return, and it is clear that their activities were confined exclusively to sweeping the candidates and potential candidates' quarters. Next page, blank or redacted. Memorandum, the next one is dated May 15th, 73. Memorandum for Howard Osborne, Director of Security. Identification of activities with embarrassment potential for the agency. 1. In responding on 7th of May by memorandum to the DDO's request for the identification of any incident which might conceivably have an embarrassment potential for the agency, I cited the equipment test, which is mentioned in the attached memo. The test in question was related to the development of full sentence redacted. And in the course of running these tests, our technicians were in and out of some 4 hotels in Miami with radio equipment. This was shortly before the political conventions, and at least one of the hotels was within a block of the convention hall. 2, although this completely innocent, although subject to misconstrual activity, may already have been drawn to your attention by our own staff, it has occurred to us we should ensure you are aware of it given the involvement of a security officer. All right, so this is what, let me tell you, this is what this entire fucking file is going to be about. The entire family jewels is going to be them giving up all this little fluff, low-hanging fruit shit, like, oh, well, we went into a hotel room and we tested some bugging equipment, which is probably what they did, testing the question related to the development of redacted. So yeah, it was most likely bugging equipment. So that's what they did. So that's what they're going to do. They're going to throw all these things that everyone's going to go, that's no big deal, right? It's going to be a whole file of things that are not a big deal, right? There's not going to be one thing in here that says, yeah, and on this date, we fucking shanked a guy in the prison at fucking, whatever. We had one of our contacts in the Aryan Brotherhood do it, right? You're not going to see anything like that. Fuck no. All right, 2, although this completely innocent, although subject to misconstrual activity, may have already been drawn to your attention by your own staff, it has occurred to us that we should ensure that you are aware of it, given the involvement of a security officer. It's so funny. Next one, May 7th, 73, memorandum for the record, subject, redacted equipment test, Miami, Florida, August of 71. The following details concerning the redacted arrangement for subject tests were provided by redacted during a telephone conversation with the undersigned 7th of May, 1973. Redacted, now retired, formerly assigned to redacted, was the redacted for the August 1971 field test of the redacted. Security arrangements for the test were handled on behalf of redacted and the redacted visitors by redacted in conjunction with the redacted security officer who was redacted at the time. Redacted was in daily contact with redacted Miami police in the course of his official liaison duties. Redacted was reluctant to call redacted at home over an open telephone line to inquire about the specifics of the redacted arrangements at this point, and suggested that the redacted security officer by this time might have been transferred back to headquarters and be available for a direct query. The writer called redacted Division D security officer, who verified the fact that redacted indeed is stationed at headquarters with a current assignment to a redacted location in redacted. Redacted is available via the following telephone connections, and that's redacted as well. So they still, after all these years, don't want none of this getting out. I doubt there's anything updated to this. Next page, the cover sheet, then on to a memorandum for Executive Director Comptroller. Subject, Roselli, John. This memorandum is for information only. 2, reference is made to our recent conversation regarding the agency's participation in political assassinations. Attached here, too, is a memorandum dated 19 November 1970, which was furnished to Mr. Helms, setting forth the circumstances of the subject's activities on behalf of the agency. Initially, Roselli was unwitting of government interest. Bullshit. But as time went on, he suspected that the U.S. government was involved in specifically the CIA. 3, Roselli is presently serving a prison sentence for conspiracy in a federal penitentiary in Seattle, Washington, and awaits deportation upon completion of his current sentence. 4, this agency was aware that Roselli intended to expose his participation in the plot. Should we not intervene on his behalf? The DCI decided to ignore his threats and take a calculated risk as the consequences that may occur with the disclosure of his story. This was subsequently done by Roselli or someone on his behalf, furnishing Jack Anderson details of the incident. Attached here, too, are 2 of Anderson's articles dealing with Roselli. Anderson is also editor of the Washington Bureau of the Washington Post Sunday Supplemental Parade. So, these dumb fucks probably should have just got him out of jail, huh? Right? They do shit like this all the time. They broke Otto Skorzeny out of prison in fucking, like, somewhere in fucking Europe. Or wherever the fuck he was. Right? All they had to do is make a phone call and say, yo, this is CIA. We need you to let this guy go. That's it. That's it. Ridiculous. Moving on. 5, individuals who were aware of this project were Messrs. Dulles Bissell, Colonel J.C. King, Colonel Sheffield Edwards, William Harvey, and James P. O'Connell. Also included were Robert Mayu and his attorneys, Edward P. Morgan and Edward Bennett Williams. 6, on 26 February 71, arrangements were made with Immigration and Naturalization Service Commissioner Raymond Farrell to flag any action that may be taken by his organization regarding deportation proceedings against Roselli. On the 26th of January 72, James F. Green, Associate Commissioner for I&NS, advised that they were deferring any deportation action for another year. That would again call it to our attention upon expiration of the deferral. 9th of November 1970, memorandum for the Director of CIA. Subject, Roselli, Johnny. 1, this memorandum is for information only. 2, in August of 1960, Mr. Richard M. Bissell approached Colonel Sheffield Edwards to determine if the Office of Security had assets that may assist in sensitive mission requiring gangster-type action. The mission target was Fidel Castro. Because of his extreme sensitivity, as number 3, only a small group was made privy to the project. The DCI was briefed and gave his approval. Colonel J.C. King, Chief White House Western Hemisphere Division, was briefed, but all details were deliberately concealed from any of the JM Wave officials. All details were deliberately concealed from any of the JM Wave officials. Why is that? Goddamn, I need to do a real deep dive into JM Wave. Like, they probably need a book of their own. Certain TSD and COMO personnel participated in the initial planning stages, but were not witting of the purpose of the mission. 4, Robert Mayu was contacted, briefed generally on the project, and requested to ascertain if he could develop an entree into the gangster element as the first step towards accomplishing the desired goal. 5, Mr. Mayu advised that he had met one Johnny Roselli on several occasions while visiting Las Vegas. He only knew him casually through clients, but was given to understand that he was a high-ranking member of the syndicate and controlled all of the ice-making machines on the strip. Mayu reasoned that if Roselli was in fact a member of the clan, he undoubtedly had connections leading into Cuban gambling interests. 6, Mayu was asked to approach Roselli, who knew Mayu as a personal relations executive handling domestic and foreign accounts, and tell him that he had recently been retained by a client who represented several international business firms which were suffering heavily financial losses in Cuba as a result of Castro's actions. They were convinced that Castro's removal was the answer to their problem and were willing to pay a price of $150,000 for its successful accomplishment. It was to be made clear to Roselli that the U.S. government was not and should not become aware of the operation. 7. The pitch was made to Roselli on 14 September 1960 at the Hilton Plaza Hotel, New York City. His initial reaction was to avoid getting involved, but through Mayhew's persuasion, he agreed to introduce him to a friend, Sam Gold, who knew the Cuban crowd. Roselli made it clear to him he did not want any money for his part and believed Sam would feel the same way. Neither of these individuals ever paid out of agency funds. 8. During the week of 25 September, Mayhew was introduced to Sam, who was staying at the Fontainebleau Hotel, Miami Beach. It was several weeks after his meeting with Sam and Joe, who was identified to him as a courier operating between Havana and Miami, that he saw photographs of both of these individuals in the Sunday supplemental parade. They were identified as Momo Salvatore Giancana and Santos Traficante, respectively. Both were on the list of Attorney General's 10 most wanted men. The former was described as Chicago chieftain of the Cosa Nostra and successor to Al Capone, and the latter the Cosa Nostra boss of Cuban operations. Hold on. The former was described as the Chicago chieftain of the Cosa Nostra and successor to Al Capone. No, he was not the successor to Al Capone. Al Capone, then it went to Frank Nitti. Then it went to Tony Accardo. And then it went to Sam Giancana. There might have even been someone between Frank Nitti and Tony Accardo. So, Mayhew called this office immediately upon ascertaining this information. The former was described as Chicago chieftain, blah, 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 got that. 9, in discussing the possible methods of accomplishing this mission, Sam suggested that they not resort to firearms, but he could be furnished some type of potent pill that could be placed in Castro's food or drink. It would be a much more effective operation. Sam indicated that he had a prospective nominee in person of Juan Orta, a Cuban official who had been receiving kickback payments from gambling interests who still had access to Castro and was in a financial bind. TSD was requested to produce 6 pills of high lethal content. 11. Joe delivered the pills to Orta. After several weeks of reported attempts, Orta apparently got cold feet and asked out of the assignment. He suggested another candidate who made several attempts without success. 12. Joe then indicated that Dr. Anthony Verona, one of the principal officers in the Cuban exile junta, had become disaffected with the apparent ineffectual progress of the junta and was willing to handle the mission through his own resources. 13. He asked for a prerequisite to the deal that he be given $10,000 for organizational expenses and requested $1,000 worth of communications equipment. 14. Dr. Verona's potential was never fully exploited, as the project was canceled shortly after the Bay of Pigs episode. Verona was advised that the offer was withdrawn and the pills were retrieved. 15. Of significant interest was an incident which involved a request levied by Sam upon Mayhew. At the height of the project negotiations, Sam expressed concern about his girlfriend, Phyllis McGuire, who he learned was getting much attention from Dan Rowan, while both were booked at the Las Vegas nightclub. And we've already heard all that story. Subsequently, the Department of Justice announced its intention to prosecute Mayhew, along with the technician. On the 7th of February, 1962, Director of Security briefed the Attorney General Robert Kennedy on the circumstances leading up to Mayhew's involvement in the wiretap. At our request, the prosecution was dropped. 16. In May 1962, Mr. William Harvey took over as case officer. It's not known by this office whether Roselli was used operationally from that point on. 17. It was subsequently learned from the FBI that Roselli had been convicted on 6 counts involving illegal entry into the United States. Our records do not reflect the date of conviction, but it is believed to have been sometime during November 1967. 18. On the 2nd of December 1968, Roselli, along with 4 other individuals, were convicted of a conspiracy to cheat members of the Friars Club of $400,000 in a rigged gin rummy game. 19. Mr. Harvey reported to the Office of Security in his contacts with Roselli during November and December 1967 and January 1968. It was his belief that Johnny would not seek out the agency for assistance in the deportation proceedings unless he actually faced deportation. Roselli expressed confidence he'd win on appeal. Of course, we all know what happened after that. Then it says, on the 18th of November 1970, or briefs on the latest development in this case, it was decided the agency was not going to help Roselli. Mayu was so advised of the agency's position, and he went in complete agreement with our stand. Further advised, he was not concerned about any publicity as it affected him personally, as Roselli should decide to tell all. He stated he would advise us promptly of any developments as they became aware of this matter, and that's from Howard J. Osborne. And, of course, we all know what happened, and they should have just paid him off, right? They should have just paid him off, gotten him out of jail, done whatever they had to do. That's their job, and they have unlimited money. So the idea that they didn't is absolutely fucking ridiculous. All right, and so that's going to do it for today. We'll pick up here first thing tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in, guys.